Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Armando. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for FLSA, and I'll be your moderator for today. Our webinar today is entitled Labor Compliance 101, Getting Schooled on Workforce Compliance Violations. And I'm proud to introduce our speaker for today, who is Jose Gaona. Jose is the Replicon VP of Product Strategy and a 28-year veteran in the labor compliance and time and attendance space. So he brings a wealth of knowledge to us today. And we're very fortunate to have Jose today talking about a very informative webinar. He will be covering trends in the area of labor compliance and giving you and your organization tips on how you can avoid falling victim to many of these compliance violations. Now, before we get started, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. For the duration of the webinar, you will be kept on mute, and that's just to allow a more smooth presentation. But you can continue to submit your questions to the Q&A panel that's located in the questions text box at the right-hand panel of your screen. And then questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar, where we'll have some time to do a Q&A session. So without any further ado, let's get started with the presentation. So Jose, take it away.
Thank you, Armando. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our Labor Compliance 101, Get Schooled on Workforce Compliance Violations. Recently, there have been significant payouts for compliant violations. Here are a few examples. Could this be your company? Tyson, $5.8 million in compensation. LinkedIn, $6 million in overtime. Russell Stover's, $2.5 million in overtime and misclassification. Don't let this be you. The Department of Labor estimates that 7 out of 10 companies are not compliant with wage and hour laws. According to the NERA Economic Consulting Report, the total amount paid by companies to settle wage and hour disputes in the last 7 years is $2.95 billion. The average amount paid by companies to resolve compliance-related cases just in 2013 is $4.5 million, and it's getting worse. Today, there's been a 400% increase in compliance violations, and it continues to grow, especially with the growing contingent workforce and the ever-growing mobile and dispersed workforce. All of this just adds to the complexity. In a recent survey conducted by the Dimensional Research, 66% of the companies face compliance challenges. Let's take a look at this chart and the top 3. 44% feel that laws, regulations, and policies are difficult to interpret. 23% say companies lack a process for tracking compliance. And 21% say violations by regions make enforcement very difficult to track. 34% have no challenges. Just recently, we were working with a company that stated, oh, well, we don't need to track time off. We provide our employees a laid-back environment. Well, once we provided them with the recent news on companies violating compliance, not only from overtime violations, but also from time off, they quickly moved this up the chain of command to legal and are currently looking into changing their processes and policies. This is a well-known company here in California. Why is it so difficult to follow the law? As we mentioned earlier, it's not intuitive and it's difficult to interpret. Companies' locations determine the law one must follow. The laws are constantly updated. In other compliance-related cases, Allstate Insurance Company had to pay up to $120 million to settle claims for misclassification of employees as exempt. A seemingly simple job like classification of employees, exempt versus non-exempt, is one of the top contributors for wage and hour violations. Here's another instance adding to the list of overtime cases. Farmers Insurance paid $90 million, yes, $90 million in back wages for unpaid overtime. Puerto Rico Department of Corrections paid $35 million. This included 4,500 workers alleging they were denied overtime. The next case included over 850 plaintiffs who alleged they were misclassified and denied overtime. This case was 24-Hour Fitness here in the U.S. Ended up paying $17.5 million. The examples we have seen show that the laws surrounding wage and hour compliance are not intuitive and are difficult to interpret. Now, imagine that you're a multi-state organization with sites in Oregon and California. While in Oregon, any time over 40 hours a week needs to be paid overtime as per the wage and hour department. California has its own version of complex overtime rules. Company's location determines the law one must follow. So not only do we have the federal, but we have every state law that we have to follow according to wage and hours. To top it off, with the fact that the law keeps changing, and we get a perfect recipe for trouble. A point to note here is we have looked at examples involving some big companies, but some smaller businesses aren't exempted from the FMLA. Small and medium organizations need to be extra careful as they are that much more constrained in terms of time and resources and, of course, money. Let's walk through some common misconceptions. These will help paint a clearer picture of compliance violations. I pay my office employees a weekly salary, so I don't have to pay overtime. Weekly salary compensation is only one of the requirements for exemption. Duties must be of an executive, administrative, or professional nature and must be over 50% of the job. Also, if salary is under $23K, they are non-exempt. In other words, it doesn't matter how monthly versus biweekly you pay them. It's based on what work they do and how much they make. Another misconception is our policy says overtime must be pre-approved. If an employee doesn't get approved beforehand, I don't have to pay the overtime. Wrong. You cannot deny payment for time worked simply because the time was not approved. The employee must still be paid for any and all overtime hours worked, even if the employee did not receive prior approval. To enforce policy, you may use disciplinary action. If an employee goes to training outside work hours, I don't have to pay for the time. If the employee is required to attend the training, it is considered to be paid time. If it is considered to be paid time, then the employer must pay for all of the time. Yes, all of that time that was incurred in training. If the employee is required to travel to training programs off-site, the employee must pay the employee for travel time as well. So once again, you pay for the entire time of training and also for the travel time. If a non-exempt employee chooses to eat lunch at her desk and ends up answering the phone a few times, she doesn't need to be paid for that time. Boy, haven't you seen that happen quite often? I think I've done it myself. To be considered unpaid time, an employee must be relieved of their duties during that period. If you allow her to answer phones while eating, she is performing employment-related tasks and must be compensated. This is regardless of whether you choose to eat, she chooses to eat at her desk or not. I have a non-exempt employee who regularly works overtime, but she never records her time on her timesheet, so I don't have to pay her for it. It is the employee's responsibility to pay overtime for all hours over 40 during a work week. If you have reason to believe an employee is working overtime, you must pay her for that time. It's no defense that she didn't record her hours on a timesheet. The employer would have the burden to show that the employee did not work the hours. It is critical, in summary, to track all hours work performed by employees. You need to train the organization on compliance. You need to document the time cards, the hours worked, the overtime, as well as the time off. And the company needs to keep abreast of FLSA changes. Review your job classifications and clearly understand the difference between exempt versus non-exempt. In the next few slides, let's look at how cultural and technology can help the compliance challenge. Let's look at the factors that add to the risk of non-compliance. These can be broadly divided into the cultural and technological factors. Cultural factors include lack of awareness about compliance rules and regulations, wrong classifications of employees, exempt and non-exempt employees, lack of training about compliance. Technological factors include no centralized solution for timekeeping, usage of paper timesheets, which is error-prone, cumbersome. There's a lack of real-time visibility into time and attendance compliance, lack of control in approving the time off, and overtime, and lack of a method to define, manage, and enforce overtime rules, other policies, employees' work schedules, and others. Having looked at factors that affect compliance, let's see what can a company do culturally to reduce the risks of non-compliance. The best way to get something embedded into a company's culture is to make sure it is a thought close to the heart of the leader, who then drives it down, articulates it clearly and forcefully on every occasion. So to make compliance part of the business as usual, as I mentioned earlier, it should flow from the top to bottom. Leaders understand FLSA, form policies around it, and communicate it and enforce them through letter and spirit. By making compliance part of the company culture, organizations protect themselves against risk now and in the future. Let's look at an example. All of us know of Alcoa, which is the world's third largest producer of aluminum. Alcoa's rate of time lost because of employee injuries, which is 1/3 of the U.S. average when Paul O'Neill took over. Today it's less than 1/20th. The reason? O'Neill's emphasis on safety fundamentally altered Alcoa's culture. Employees, managers, and even bottom-rung workers alike began showing initiative instead of quietly waiting for orders. Productivity soon began rising, and so did the financial capital. Here's a famous quote about audit. I'm sure most of you have heard it. It goes like this: I'm not suggesting there are any errors at all. I'm saying that without a proper audit, there's no way to be sure. Let's look at another instance of a non-compliance caused by misclassification. In January 2010, Staples Inc. had to pay $42 million to settle a number of suits for misclassification. Making audits part of the policy is very important for tracking compliance-related issues. Wrong classification of employees is one of the top reasons for noncompliance. So companies need to conduct an audit of existing jobs and job descriptions, pay practices at regular intervals, and ensure conformance to exemptions described by the Department of Labor. Companies need to adapt a culture where they must make training on compliance a regular habit. A tribute to Dilbert here. This trip resonates the importance of training. You wouldn't want to be on this flight. Training on compliance is necessary for organizations that are serious about compliance. Managers must make sure people are given adequate training in FLSA, especially importance of companies which face a good deal of employee churn. Now let's look at how companies use technology to help with compliance. Having looked at the steps that companies can take in terms of, in calculating as part of its culture, it's also look at other options which can help organizations getting started on the path to compliance by the use of technology. Steps to reduce risk by use of technology. Failure by companies to understand what needs to be included in hours worked has cost them dearly. Companies have had to dole out huge amounts of money for inadvertently missing out travel time, meal breaks, and other things from hours worked. So they need to have a clear rules around what is and what is not part of working hours based on the direction from the wage and the hour department. Additionally, not being able to track time accurately is one of the top reasons for compliance violations. Companies need to have centralized systems with the right business rules to help track time accurately and keep them compliant. Companies also need to adapt technologies, have safeguards which against unwanted edits of timesheets. The time cards are official business records, and falsification of time card records are violations of the law. In a recent case in Stanford, a city employee got fired for manipulating the timesheets of an employee reporting to him. The deeper concern was that the attendance system did not pick up these changes. The time and attendance system needs to support multi-level approvals, have safeguards against unwanted edits, and store employee timesheet information, sometimes for even 3 years or more. So corporations must ensure they have a plan accordingly, and their systems need to support this. As we all know, overtime is another big reason for noncompliance. So the employers need to work that much harder on managing overtime. They need to set up clear rules on overtime, have accurate calculations done, and at the same time, control overtime calls. Apart from managing overtime policies, companies also need to look into time off as it affects compliance. Time off, if not managed properly, aside from being a major liability on the company's balance sheet, can also be a huge administrative burden. Calculating time off accruals, administering end-of-year resets, and applying other rules and regulations is very time-consuming. Unmanaged time off can also cause overtime issues, which affect compliance. A recent study shows that tracking time off accurately with a well-defined policy can help firms and save 3% to 15% of their total operation costs. Time off management leads to better staffing, savings in operating costs, and reduces compliance risk. Let's quickly look at an example of a company with a considerable compliance exposure risk. and how they applied technology to help them be compliant and making them more productive. This customer is a world leader in industrial specialty gases and engineering. They were on a high growth path and had a manual and insufficient time tracking process. They faced high payroll costs due to excessive overtime and time leakage. They found managing California meal breaks law was a big deal. They automated with time and attendance with Replicon's time and attend to resolve their California meal and overtime, as well as time off management issues. This was a small step they took towards big results. They saw 20% drop in overtime costs and reduced exposure to compliance violations. They decreased time leakage and streamlined time off management. 80% productivity improved in processing payroll. In summary, here are some tips from instilling a culture of compliance and technology. From a cultural basis, we need to completely make sure that compliance flows from the top to the bottom. Make audits part of the policy and provide training for all levels of employees. And that's continuous training. Technologically, we need to track time accurately, have approval mechanisms and audit trails, manage overtime policies, and enforce management of time off. Let's look at some features of our time and attendance solution that help companies in becoming compliant. Our product helps improve the time capture process by centralizing it. Time information is captured accurately, and it's designed for everybody, end users, supervisors, and managers. Also available anytime, anywhere, as it is a cloud-based solution. Our solution also enforces checks and balances to make sure that time is spent approving the right people and also to have safeguards against unwanted edits. So you can customize the approval workflow for each employee, and you can have 5 levels of authorization, ensuring accuracy and better control. It helps in easy configuration of business rules like overtime or break rules, and then these can be applied consistently across the workforce based on the state, company policies that they pay, as well as overtime calculations are free of any errors. An example here is how we deal with California overtime rule. Real-time reporting and visibility. Our solution comes with some pre-configured reports that are very useful. Also, customers can build custom reports to have visibility over some organizational parameters that they want to keep track of, like compliance. This helps them to providing feedback on a current scheme of things and giving them adequate time to take necessary action. Time and Attend helps companies by giving historical data access. Companies can run a robust audit trail to track who made changes and when. Data is stored and available as long as you use the system. This helps them in supplying the data needed for external audits. We also help manage time off liabilities and policies. Organizations can create time off policies, automate approvals, and administration of time off as per business rules, and monitor the company's time off liability in real time. We are Replicon, pioneers in cloud technology, offering our products that are 100% organically built for the cloud, providing a modern user experience with an intuitive UI and an outstanding customer service group. I hope that I was able to educate you on what has occurred in the news today compliance misconceptions, and how to embrace compliance within your culture, and how technology can really help keep you compliant and stay out of court. Now we'll open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you, Jose, for So at this point, everyone, please feel free to submit your questions. Again, this is in the question text box on the GoToMeeting panel on your right-hand side of the screen. And as you start typing in your questions, we'll start going down the list and start addressing those questions and have Jose answer them for you. So please feel free to put those in. And let's see, I'm looking through the list now, and here's one from Karen. The question is, how often should a company do a compliance audit?
Well, if you have a system in place, you should do an audit yearly. But if you do have a manual system, we recommend that you do it quarterly.
Great. And let's see, here's one other question from John. If we are considering implementing a system to automate time and attendance, what are some of the most important factors we should consider?
You know, there are several factors, but one is usability. You want something that's simple and modern so that all the generations out there today that are in the workforce are happy and able to use it. It needs to be very configurable for the ever-changing rules for compliance and FLSA. And of course, you want one that can cross many jurisdictions as well as globally.
Okay, great, thanks. And please feel free to submit your questions. If you have any, we'll address them here. Here's another question from Eric. What resources do you recommend to keep up to date on labor law and compliance?
There are a lot of great resources out there, like the Department of Labor website, which can guide you through quite a bit and, of course, answer all your questions. We also at Replicon have a compliance site that is very helpful. We even have a place in there to ask the expert, and we can immediately get you your answers.
Great. And let's see, okay, here's another question from Jan. Right now, my organization does manual timesheets. If we choose a software system to help with this, are we able to transfer historical data into the system, or will we have to basically start from scratch?
Normally, you start from scratch, especially for time and attendance. You don't want to have to enter all the time and attendance information. But the data that they can possibly import would be, for instance, your time off, your accruals. We can import those. But as far as time and attendance, you do pretty much start from scratch.
Okay, great. And we have one more question here. If any of you have any more questions, please feel free to submit them now. Let's go to this question. What is the best way to train my employees on compliance and current labor regulations?
As we mentioned in the presentation, it's very important to embrace compliance within your organization and actually have a formal process in which to relay all the compliance information. One place to start is in your employee handbook. Make sure that those are updated and that employees actually walk through those different situations as far as compliance, overtime rules, approving the overtime, time off, your rules around time off. And that should be part of your onboarding, as well as on a quarterly basis, you know, whether it's web-based or it's classroom style, but it's very important to keep reinforcing those rules.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jose. Well, it looks like we're here. We don't have any more questions. Thank you, Jose, for addressing all of these questions and for the great presentation and delivery today. At this point, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us today on this webinar. On behalf of Jose and Replicon, we'd like to thank you. Have a great day. And if you have any questions and want more information, please feel free to contact us at sales@replicon.com. We hope to see you on an upcoming webinar soon. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.